In the quiet town of Harrow's End, strange things rarely happened, and when they did, people preferred not to talk about them. Eli Mercer had walked down Bell Street almost every afternoon after school for years. It was the fastest way home, passing the same familiar buildings, the bakery with the cracked blue sign, the silent tailor shop that always seemed closed, and the narrow sidewalk where rainwater gathered after every storm. But one evening, as grey clouds drifted low over the town and the air smelled like wet pavement, Eli noticed something that had never been there before. A small antique shop sat between the bakery and the tailor shop, its crooked wooden sign swaying gently above the door. The windows were dusty and dim, filled with strange old objects that looked like they belonged in another century. But what truly caught Eli's attention was the mask displayed in the center of the window. It was pale and smooth, shaped almost perfectly like a human face, yet something about it felt slightly wrong. The carved lips seemed to form a faint smile that changed depending on how the light hit it. The empty eye holes looked darker than the shadows around them, as if they were deeper than they should be. Eli stood there for longer than he meant to, staring at it while the wind rattled the sign above the shop. His friend Mara eventually noticed he had stopped walking and turned back to see what had caught his attention. When she followed his gaze to the mask, her expression shifted immediately. She couldn't explain why, but something about it made her uneasy. Eli, however, felt something very different. It wasn't fear that drew him closer to the door. It was curiosity. When he stepped inside the shop, a thin old man behind the counter looked up with silver eyes that seemed to see more than they should. The man spoke quietly, explaining that the mask was called the Veil of Many and that it had a strange history tied to the town itself. Eli laughed nervously, assuming it was just a strange sales pitch meant to make the object seem valuable. Still, something about the mask kept pulling his attention back to it. Within minutes he found himself buying it, carrying it home wrapped carefully in black cloth. The rain had started again by the time he reached his house, but Eli barely noticed. The only thing on his mind was the mask resting in his hands and the strange feeling that somehow it had been waiting for him. That night, Eli placed the mask on his desk and tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just an old antique with an interesting design, nothing more. Yet every few minutes his eyes drifted back toward it. The pale surface seemed almost alive in the faint glow of the moonlight entering through his bedroom window. The carved smile no longer looked playful or decorative. Instead, it seemed to be watching him. Hours passed, and sleep never came. Finally, sometime after midnight, Eli gave in to the strange curiosity that had been building inside him all evening. Slowly, he picked up the mask and held it in his hands. It felt colder than he expected, the smooth surface almost like stone. With a hesitant breath, he lifted it and placed it against his face. Instantly, the room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. A brief wave of dizziness passed through his body, and then everything went still again. When Eli looked toward the mirror across the room, he froze. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. His body was still there, wearing the same grey hoodie and jeans, but the face was completely different. The person in the mirror looked older, with a thin scar running across one cheek and eyes that seemed filled with memories Eli had never lived. Shocked, he ripped the mask off his face. His normal reflection returned immediately, but his heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst from his chest. The next morning at school, Eli felt strange all day. It was as if fragments of thoughts that didn't belong to him were drifting through his mind. Mara noticed the change instantly, asking him why he seemed distracted. Eli tried to laugh it off, but the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Later that evening, unable to stop himself, he tried the mask again. This time the reflection changed into a completely different face. Younger. Nervous. Almost frightened. The moment Eli removed the mask, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the floor near his mirror were muddy footprints that had not been there before. And they were leading straight toward the window. Over the next few days, the strange experiences only grew worse. Eli began noticing small details about people around town that he had never known before. Random facts slipped out of his mouth during conversations, things about neighbors, teachers, and shop owners that no one had ever told him. Sometimes he caught himself saying names that sounded familiar yet completely foreign at the same time. Mara became increasingly concerned as she watched her friend struggle to explain the things happening to him. Eventually she insisted they return to Bell Street to confront the shop owner who had sold him the mask. But when they arrived at the spot where the antique shop had stood just days earlier, they found nothing. The building was gone. In its place was only a moss-covered brick wall covered with faded posters and peeling paint, as if no door had ever existed there. Confused and unsettled, Eli and Mara stood staring at the empty space until someone approached them from across the street. Jonah Vance, a quiet classmate who rarely spoke to anyone, looked unusually serious. Without asking many questions, he told them he knew about the mask. Years earlier, his grandfather had spoken about an object that showed people the hidden truths of the town. According to him, the mask didn't simply change appearances, it revealed the identities and memories of people connected to Harrow's End's past. Each face represented someone whose story had been lost, hidden, or forgotten. The longer someone wore the mask, the more those forgotten memories would begin to blend with their own. Eli tried to dismiss the idea, but Jonah said something that stopped him completely. He repeated a phrase Eli had heard whispered the night before while wearing the mask. "Find the locked room beneath the chapel." At that moment, Eli realized the voices and images were not random hallucinations. They were messages. The old chapel stood on a hill overlooking the cemetery, its wooden doors rarely opened except during the coldest months of winter. Late one evening, Eli, Mara, and Jonah climbed the hill together, carrying flashlights and the mysterious mask wrapped in cloth. The wind rustled through the trees surrounding the chapel, creating an uneasy silence broken only by the creaking of the building's old wooden frame. Inside, the chapel looked abandoned. Dust covered the pews, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and damp stone. Behind the altar they discovered something unexpected, a hidden trapdoor concealed beneath a worn rug. When they pulled it open, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. The underground room below looked like it had not been visited in decades. Stone walls surrounded shelves filled with ledgers, locked boxes, and old portraits turned toward the wall. In the center of the room stood a wooden chair facing a tall oval mirror covered by a black cloth. As Eli stepped forward and pulled the cloth away, the air seemed to grow colder instantly. Instead of reflecting their images normally, the mirror revealed something else entirely. A woman stood behind them in the reflection, though none of them could see her in the room itself. Her face shifted slowly between different expressions and identities, like a collection of many lives layered together. The whisper that followed echoed softly through the chamber, "Return what was taken." Over the following days, the three friends searched through the records hidden beneath the chapel. Slowly they began to uncover the story of Lenora Wren, the wife of Harrow's End's founder. Historical documents described her as intelligent and curious, someone who often hosted gatherings where influential townspeople wore elaborate masks. But as they read further, they discovered darker details hidden within old letters and forgotten diaries. Lenora had uncovered evidence that the town's founding families had built their wealth through deception and violence. Several people had disappeared during the early years of Harrow's End, and the official records described their deaths as accidents. Lenora had believed otherwise. According to the documents, she created the mask as a symbolic tool meant to reveal truth during her gatherings. But once the town's leaders realized she had uncovered their secrets, they turned against her. Lenora vanished soon afterward, and her story was erased from the town's official history. Yet somehow her presence remained connected to the mask. When Eli wore it again beneath the chapel, the woman appeared clearly in the mirror. Her shifting faces stopped changing, revealing one final identity. Lenora Wren looked directly at him and slowly raised her hand, pointing toward the locked boxes behind him. Inside the boxes were letters, testimonies, and legal documents that proved the town's darkest secrets. The evidence revealed decades of corruption, hidden crimes, and stories that had been deliberately erased from history. As Eli and his friends examined the documents, Sheriff Tom Vance suddenly appeared at the chapel. His expression made it clear that he had known about the hidden room for years. At first he tried to convince them to leave everything alone, explaining that exposing the truth could destroy the town's reputation and create chaos. But as the mirror behind them flickered and Lenora's reflection appeared again, even the sheriff could no longer ignore the past. The mask had never been meant to harm anyone. It had been meant to reveal what people refused to face. During a violent storm that night, Eli brought the mask and the documents to the town hall. With Mara and Jonah beside him, he revealed everything the three of them had discovered. One by one, the hidden truths of Harrow's End spread through the gathered crowd. The stories that had been buried for generations were finally spoken aloud. As the truth emerged, the mask began to crack slowly in Eli's hands. By the time the storm passed and the morning light filled the hall, the mask had split in two. When Eli looked into a mirror afterward, he saw only his own reflection. The other faces were gone. Lenora's presence had finally faded, her story no longer hidden in silence. Harrow's End would never be the same, but for the first time in generations, the town would have to face its history honestly. And Eli knew that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply refuse to look away from the truth.